use this so I can see my notes. I'm going to try anyway. It's not looking. There we go. Okay. Right. Hi, everyone. So those of you who know me know that my background is geotech, and surprisingly, the front page of this doesn't have any landslips on it. So that gives you a flavour that it's not going to be all about landslips. However, you'll be pleased to see there is one, at least one. So who am I? Just to give you a bit of background for those who don't know me, I'm a geologist. I'm obviously from Ireland. I did my Bachelor of Science in Cork. I then worked for a couple of years before going to do a Master's in Engineering Geology at Leeds University, thinking I would stay for a couple of years, and I'm still here. So then I ended up, after that Master's, working on the railway in Scotland, where they had just started doing earthworks examinations. It was a fairly new thing at the time in about 1999, 2000, and did lots of work around earthworks exams and designs for railway earthworks. Rock cuttings are my favourite, really. That's a picture of me at a landslip that happened at Baildon, probably 6 or 7 years ago, something like that, maybe a bit longer. I spent my first part of my career with consulting engineer in Glasgow and then in York, joined Network Rail and worked with the asset management team for, as that says, 15 years. And as we said, I've spent the last couple of years with the regional engineering team, getting to know other bits of the business, which has been quite fun. It's different, it's definitely different, but I've been enjoying it. I'm a chartered geologist as well. So the first few slides I'm doing is kind of my background and why I care about weather, just from where I've come from, mostly because I find it interesting. So again, as a reminder for people, the railway runs on embankments and through cuttings so much of its length. This infrastructure is old. We manage the assets through examinations, evaluations. That doesn't have the word monitoring in there, but we do quite a lot of monitoring. And then we've got programs of kind of renewal, refurbishment and maintenance. And then when incidents occur, the teams put on their capes and they go and try and fix it. Mostly we want to stop landslides happening though. So that's that. I went through some of my old presentations and I found a few slides on some old kind of weather related incidents that I thought would be of interest here. So it was a very, very wet Christmas and New Year 2015-16. Those who live in York might remember York getting flooded. I was in Cork at the time and I remember kind of watching it from afar, seeing all the things starting to happen. And when we came back to the office, this was our attempt at trying to understand all the things that had happened on the Newcastle-Carlisle line. You've got just the photos here. This was Gooseholme. This is the big landslip we had at Farnley, the one on the bottom left, and the other one I think is Crane's Huff or something like that. But it kind of gives you a flavour of the kind of activity that the earthworks teams have to do when you've got those extreme weather events happening. I just liked the picture. So the huge focus on weather came in particular off the back of the Carmot accident, which, was a terrible tragedy. So to remind everyone again, the incident, I've got it written down here because I want to get it right. The incident at Carmot happened when the Aberdeen to Glasgow Queen Street passenger service derailed after striking debris, which had washed onto the down line northeast of Carmont signal box. There were 9 people on board the train at the time, 3 employees of the train operator Iberia ScotRail Limited and 6 passengers, and the driver of the train, Brett McCullough, the conductor Donald Dinney, and the passenger Christopher Stupbury suffered fatal injuries in the accident. And the remaining 5 passengers were taken to hospital. So the train was travelling almost at line speed. It ran into aggregate material that had washed down onto the line from a French drain during the extreme rainfall event, lifting and derailing the front wheels, ran in a derailed condition before it hit a bridge parapet and derailed most of the rest of the train. So I just wanted to get that right, so I wanted to read it. So following Carmont, in the geotech team, I use these slides in a CIRO presentation. So if any of you were at that, you'll see these next few slides. But I thought it, again, of interest to know what it was like in the geotech team in York. So we were managing earthworks assets in Eastern in the immediate days after the incident happened. So one of the first things we did was try and identify any location that might have had similar characteristics to what happened at Carmont. And go and visit them. Just go and look to see if there was any risk at those locations. So it kind of this just gives you a flavour of the number of sites that we visited between ourselves and our contractors. And there were about 20 locations with issues identified, and smallish things, partially blocked crest ditches, some damaged drainage, and then these two photos here show. The top one is the landslip that was identified in a little freight loop just outside Leeds. And then that was it after they'd cleared away the slipped material on the aerial image below. But that was kind of the first thing. And so that was it. There was as an organisation, the DUs helped us. Everybody put their hand up to try and help. People wanted to try and do what we could to try and see if there was any risk that we needed to address. This was the other thing that happened in the immediate kind of weeks afterwards. There was new operational guidance to route control, where if there was extreme or adverse weather and there were any incidents, there was guidance around slowing trains down, making sure that until trains had passed and you knew the line was clear. We also started to use what we refer to as operational route sections, so that safety restrictions could be assigned to specific geographical areas. So this was a very quick piece of guidance that was brought out, and that has now been incorporated into the main standard. The other thing, as I say, from my perspective again, was about the use of the convective alerting tool, which was in flight at the time. It was being trialled by what was then LNW, Northwest and Central. They were trialling it, and so that was accelerated following Carmont. So essentially what that does is you've got each one of those dots is, I think it's 500 meters. I'm looking at the geotech team. As my memory is, each one of those is a 500 meter bit. You get a forecast that tells you for the next kind of 30 minutes and a couple of hours, 1, 2, and 3 hours, that's it. And if you're going to breach a threshold of something, I might say it there, the number of millimeters of rain, essentially it's those really high intensity rainfall events that you get in the summer storms. So if one of those are going to breach, it'll alert in the control center and we'll put a speed restriction on. Well, the control teams will put a speed restriction on. So that was kind of introduced quite quickly. And then this is what the tool looks like. I won't go through that, but basically, the instructions to the control teams at the time were, when they've introduced what a purser is what it was called at the time, precautionary emergency speed restriction. At least one train has to traverse the section on each line. A minimum of 30 minutes is gone since you applied the speed, and then at the time they had to get agreement from the earthworks team to remove the speed. We've taken that away because that didn't really work. But anyway, that was kind of one of the things that came quite quickly out of it. And here is one example of a location where there was a slip happened while we had a speed restriction imposed. So it would have been, so this kind of shows you that the first bit, the top left, it tells you about imposing a speed restriction because the CAT alert came through, and then the incident was superseded by a landslip incident that happened. So the trains was running at 40 miles an hour instead of line speed, which was 90 miles an hour. So that was, one example of where it has, it was a really good idea that we had that. Okay, so that was the flavour of what kind of we did in the geotech team in those weeks, following Carmont. There were 4 separate reports that, again, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. There's the Lord Robert Mayor report, which looked at earthworks management and drainage management. There was Dame Julia Slingo, who looked at weather management. And then there were the 2 formal reports from RABE and Network Rail's Level 3. Out of those, there were, bottom left, I've got the numbers there. There were 99 separate recommendations, and they were put into 55 different action plans. And this slide, you don't have to remember it. This is an attempt at putting all of those different action plans into kind of buckets. So you can see on the left-hand side is the regional and the route recommendations. And so LRM on this slide, LRM means Lord Robert Mayor. So that's the kind of geotech and drainage ones. Obviously, RABE is the RABE ones. The ones that are referenced A9 something, those are the ones from the Level 3 investigation. And then there's the one in black there, which is the DJS, Dame Julia Slingo. So that gives you a flavour of the kind of things that have been done in the back of Carmont. The next slide here is about the Weather Risk Task Force. So as part of following Dame Julia Slingo's report, they created what we call the Weather Risk Task Force. So, and the idea is that that's a kind of a national, it integrates all the different activities, tracks them all, makes sure that they're kind of tied in together. The scope is more than doubled since the team was formed. I'll show you that in a minute. And there's a number of key improvements that have happened and are still happening. And I'm going to show you a few of those, not too many, because it is a bit overwhelming. There's so much stuff happening in this space. This shows you how the Weather Risk Task Force kind of started. It initially started to deliver the Dame Julia Slingo and the Lord Robert Mayor stuff. And then a little later, about a year later, it was decided to include the RABE and the Level 3 industry recommendations. So that was the scope. When I joined the kind of this part of the business a couple of years ago, that was the scope. We hadn't yet brought the extreme heat ones into play. But I'll do a couple of extreme heat ones in a bit. So this slide is just showing you what I'm planning on talking to you a little bit more about. There's the top left stuff about drainage. There's one about vulnerable drainage systems, and then there's drainage asset management culture and drainage competency. So I'm going to do those in a kind of a bucket in a little bit. We'll look briefly at the weather scenario tabletop exercises and a little bit about the weather stuff from Dame Julia Slingo, about the science plan and the Weather Academy, a little bit on that. But before I get to that, I just want to now talk about the extreme heat. So you will, I'm sure you might remember, in late July 2022, we had these 2 days of this record-breaking heat wave. I've got a quote here from Andrew Haynes. So the weather we've experienced this week has put a huge amount of pressure on our infrastructure, our staff and our passengers. And with extreme weather events becoming more frequent as our climate continues to change, we've got to pull out all the stops to make our railway as resilient as possible. So at that point, he commissioned this task force, this extreme heat task force, with leading global experts who looked at, and then the next slide. So we have four nice, neat mirroring of the previous one, 4 separate reports looking at different aspects of it. So we have, again, Dame Julia Slingo came and looked at weather for us. We reviewed how the ops side of things worked with Simon Lane. Transport Focus had, and I don't remember his name, I'll tell you now because some of you might recognise him. I'm not going to be able to find him now, I have too much text there. Anyway, Transport Focus look at what rail passengers need during extreme heat. And the Sir Doug Okervie engineering report looks at the engineering related stuff. So that's the 4 reports that were done. So those reports, they were knocked around a little bit between Network Rail and the people writing the reports. You can see like the incident happened in July 2022. We had some of the reports back in March 23, May 23, and then it was June, and then August. So there was a little bit of knocking around between Network Rail and the people who wrote the reports. All of the recommendations were reviewed, and sometimes some of them were kind of amended and tweaked, and we ended up with 90 separate recommendations. Not all of those were for Network Rail. Many of them were, but not all of them. And hang on, I was going to, yeah, so this is an attempt again to put all of the different recs into the different buckets. So left-hand side is the regional and route recommendations. And then you got system operator, technical authority, and route services. The difference with these is that because it took best part of a year to get these reports through to us, there had actually been a lot of work already done in improving how we manage hot weather. And so the top one is ones where we need to write action plans. And the second kind of bucket down, those are ones where, you know, as a business, we said, we think we're pretty much done those. The work that we've done it. And so we're going straight to closure with these ones. That doesn't mean that we can just say they're closed. So there's still quite a lot of evidence to gather and you know, narrative to write around, and, you know, things to double check that they really can be closed. So there's still a lot of work to do with those. But I was going to, this previous slide, yeah. So there were the key findings were our operational response to extreme heat is just too reactive. Wanted to you know, use forecast to better identify risk, deciding what service we want to run, targeting our resources proactively. Gaps in the capability of our staff, really, meaning that our assets aren't resilient as we want them to be. So the kind of, in essence, increasing our engineering and asset management oversight of maintenance to make sure that we get better passenger outcomes. And then the other two, internal weather expertise and capability, and also around improving the quality and timeliness of information given to passengers. So that's the kind of the big ticket items, that kind of the overarching key findings. So, and then of the extreme heat recs, because we're only kind of in the early-ish stage of closing these down, there's still quite a few open. So I've got 3 I was going to show you a little bit about. Okay. So back to the ones I'm going to talk about Carmont. So that kind of gives you a bit of an introduction now, and now we'll get into a few recs where we've closed them and we've made real change. So this one. So I took this from an action plan around the drainage asset management culture. So you'll all know Mona from the TA, Mona, head of drainage and lineside. And this is, I quite liked this one. It's a really good summary of all the activity that they're doing in the TA. As head of drainage and lineside, they're putting a lot, you know, there's so many different strands to the work they're doing. And what this image does, it's mapping all of that activity against the Institute of Asset Management, what's it called, excellence model, is a kind of framework to show the work that we're doing and why it's going to improve it overall. So you can see things like, you know, water management strategy, having a drainage technical strategy, streams. I don't remember what streams stand for. It's a fancy acronym. It's basically the asset management system, asset recording system for all the drainage assets. I'm not sure why I'm looking at you, Louisa. So, but that's a new tool that's been developed over the last few years. Looking at drainage asset policy, the FTE resource calculator. So that was a way to try and estimate what kind of resources would be needed to manage the drainage we've got, so that we could make an estimate as to how many more staff we needed to bring in. And I do have some numbers about that in one of my next slides. Looking at things like inventory, making sure we've got all of our assets actually recorded in Ellipse, which we do now, I'm very pleased to say. Some of the other stuff, that we're doing, working on, yeah, detailed drawings, etc. So you can see the kind of stuff that's been happening around the drainage asset management culture. It's been really good work. Drainage competency is also a really, really impressive piece of work that's been ongoing for the last few years. So the recommendation was to address the lack of competence and resource and develop and implement the requirements of the drainage asset policy, drainage standards, etc. And so creating these brand new drainage and line side training courses. There's some e-learning ones and some face-to-face ones. They start, you know, they were starting from nowhere really. It was, yeah, starting from scratch. They now have, this was the latest I took from their SharePoint. So all the 13 e-learning courses are available for anybody in Network Rail. You can go and have a look and sign up to do those as far as I know. So you've got 3 around boundary measures, then there's 5 around drainage design, inspection, rapid response, etc., and 4 for vegetation. And then the face-to-face courses, they are nearly all there. There's just 6 more to come, and those, yeah, so those, you can read those there. So that's really, really good piece of work. And this shows you that since each one of these training courses has come in, this graph is showing you the number of people who have done the course. So you can see, you know, a relatively slow start with that blue one, which is the easiest to read really, and that's for drainage inspection and maintenance. And you can see it's kind of been ramping up, and then each one as they come in, they're starting to be done. So that I quite liked that little graph showing you what people have been doing. So the next one I'm going to talk about is about increasing our drainage staff, the drainage inspection and maintenance staff in the DUs. The photograph is just one of the embankments. I don't know where this one was, but left-hand side is the before photo, right-hand side is the after photo. A classic photo of someone doing some nice clearing out of a drainage ditch. But essentially, oh yeah, so actually the numbers were, I think 429 was the target across all 5 regions. It was 103 for Eastern, and all those staff have been kind of pretty much in post since early, maybe 10 months ago, something like that. So there, obviously the training is ongoing at the moment. So that's a really big win, I think, for the drainage side of things. In Eastern, we've been doing risk-based maintenance and risk-based inspection, and we've been reporting weekly on that. And those are for the highest risk earthworks stroke drainage sites. And that work has been ongoing. I wanted to show you these. So this recommendation came from the level 3 investigation, and it's about basically identifying locations which are similar to the site at Carmont. So you've got high energy, kind of steep downslope drains that could potentially get washed out. So we have basically, we have closed this recommendation through we've got our complete drainage asset inventory, and we are developing and preparing these drainage plans, and we've done these for the highest risk locations. So what I wanted to show you here is, so we've got the inventory is complete. We've got these draft drainage plans, and the main point of these drainage plans is that you get, they're not written just by the drainage teams. The drainage teams have to interact with track, the DU, structures and geotech. They need to make sure that anybody who is potentially affected by this drainage buys into the drainage inspection and maintenance plan that they've got, so that, you know, if the earthworks team are particularly worried about a site, they'll make sure that the crest drainage, say, on that cutting will get inspected every 3 months instead of the standard every year, or whatever the rules would be for that location. So this little spreadsheet here is just showing that there's a kind of a tracking of the production of all of these drainage plans. This image here is just a screenshot from, I think, an earlier version of these drainage management plans. And the reason I'm showing it is to kind of show you that there is a link between these plans and what's in ellipse, so that the plan will get signed off by everyone who cares about the drainage in that location. And then there is a flow through between that and what actually happens in ellipse. And then the drainage teams will be counted against what happens in ellipse, so that there's, you know, the work that's needed will get done, and will be tracked and identified if it's missed. So that's that one. And here's just a part of the drainage plans have these drawings as well, which show you exactly where these critical assets, for example, might be, so that somebody picks it up, they can go out, they can find it on site. So that's that one. Okay, so the next one I wanted to tell you about was about periodic tabletop exercises on weather scenarios. So this one here, so when I joined the team 2 years ago now, I know it is 2 years ago actually, we ran our first regional exercise. It was over in one of the hotels across the road, and we had people from all 4 routes, which was quite good. We had people from the TOCs, we had some from the National Operating Centre, the control teams, of course, there was some from asset management, and we had the legal team there with us as well. And the little image on the right-hand side kind of gives you a flavour of the stuff that was used to do this exercise. So we had people sitting on each desk, we had, you know, groups sitting on each desk, and we had the scenario. It would, you know, tell us what was happening. There's a storm coming, what do you consider? And it was really good exercise to kind of see the different bits of the business, like the control teams, what it was that they thought about, what people, you know, who had asset management experience would think about. And then as part of this exercise, it was being run by a training organisation. And there was some of the outcomes from that was that there was several areas for future improvements. There was work around the review of the EWAT process. And for those who don't know, EWAT is Extreme Weather Action Teleconference. And it's one of the activities that happens when we know there's extreme weather coming. The control teams will call an EWAT, and everybody who is involved in asset management and maintenance has to kind of come on that call and be prepared for it, and talk about what activity they've done to prepare for the extreme weather that's coming. The development of integrated weather management plans in each route. There was also some gaps identified in the resources and the training of key staff. So the RIC and TIC competency, and I forgotten what RIC and TIC, incident control. Can't remember what the R and the T. Let's see if anybody nobody knows. The RIC and TIC competencies for the control staff. And there was also a need for improved, timely and succinct communications between NR, the TOCs and the media on our weather management plans. So we use media videos, news articles, live weather alerts to kind of represent the reactive nature of a storm, and kind of what the decisions we would need to take and what we need to consider. It's worth noting now, though, that there is, some of you will be familiar with this thing called View 360. So instead of having to pay an outside company to come in and run through a scenario with us, we can actually create our own scenarios, where, you know, we can kind of do our own bespoke set of, you know, events that might happen and run people through it ourselves, which is quite good. We've done a couple of test ones of that. So right, I've got a few slides now on these, which are the Dame Julia Slingo stuff, which is around it's all about weather. So the recommendations, the things I'm going to talk about is the one which is called proof of concept, and that was basically, I find it a bit more than a bit confusing. I definitely don't understand the science of it, but she was saying that have been advances in forecasting that we should be exploiting in order to understand our risk better. And I'll show you a slide on that and see. So some of you might understand it better than I do. So that was the proof of concept. They looked at that and they said, yes, we think we can do that. And now that is being moved into what's called ROWS or ROWS Plus. So ROWS and ROWS Plus is going to be a new digital platform which will replace the existing NRWS. So for anybody who is familiar with NRWS, it's the Network Rail Weather Service. And it has the CAT tool on it, the convective alerting tool that I mentioned earlier. And it has loads of weather stuff on it that the control teams use. But that as a system, I think we have it for like 5 years, and then it has to go out to tender again, and it kind of, every 5 years it might be a different organization giving us that. That's at least my understanding. Whereas the idea is that ROWS will be a network rail platform that we've developed ourselves, which I think in and of itself is going to be a big win. The science plan. So I'll talk a little bit about that, about the work that the Met Office have done to try and understand the different earthwork types and what the thresholds of wetness and rainfall that might pose a risk to them. And then the last bit here is about the Weather Academy, which is about developing this weather community, making sure that we can share with each other, we can learn, ask questions and share knowledge. Yeah. So those are the bits about Dame Julia Slingo I'm going to talk about. Here is I don't know about you, but I'm a bit confused by these things. So we talk about ensemble forecasting schematic and deterministic forecast. And I was quite good at maths at school, but I definitely don't follow this. I'd like to understand it a bit better, but I'm sharing this with you so that you can see that there is a lot of science going on in the background to try and work out which weather forecasting tools we should be using. I'm a bit basic when it comes to weather forecasts. I'll just look at what my phone says. So the science plan, this is all I put in about the science plan because I can talk about it a bit more. So essentially what they've done, and again, this is the science that's been presented for this. There's like a big document with lots of calcs in it and showing you how they've done it. And I don't follow all of that. So I'm hoping that I'm translating it reasonably well for people in the room. So essentially, they are looking at across the board, all of our earthworks assets, what those earthworks assets are made of. As I'm sure you're aware, the geology of this country is quite wide and varied. And what the geotech team in the TA have done is we've looked at those and we've kind of put the different types of earth, of soil and rock, well, soil actually, into buckets. So into a smaller number of types of material, depending on how it might behave. And so we've got these kind of smaller number of types of soil. We've got the history. We've got what's called Civ 185, our earthwork failure database. So NR geological cohorts is the buckets I was talking about, the types of soil. They've looked at rainfall radar data, and they've looked at these ensemble data, the forecast, which as I said, I don't quite understand myself. They've looked at soil moisture deficit. So for those who don't understand that, it's essentially how much water is needed to bring it up to full saturation. Looking at the geotech team to see if I've got that right. Okay, so soil moisture deficit is if it's saturated and it's got enough water in it, it'll be kind of in the middle. And then if it dries out, you've got a deficit. And if it goes above that, you won't be above it being too dry, she said. Okay, anyway, so it looks at how dry is the soil. That's the essence of that one, is how dry is the soil? What's our forecasts like? What kind of soil is it? And what's our history of failures? And then they've analysed the failures that they've got for how wet was the ground when that failure happened and how much rainfall had happened in the preceding few days, week, 2 weeks. Okay. And they've come up with a kind of these failure pathways. So for certain soil types, if it gets very saturated because you've had rain for 3 weeks and it hasn't, dried out, and then you've got more rain coming, then that might be a failure pathways opened up. So we've got this work from the science plan, which has these thresholds, but what we haven't done yet is worked out how we're going to use them. So that's kind of a work in progress. It's very promising. There's some really good stuff there. So, but it's not a quick win. It's not going to happen that quickly. So that was the science plan. The Weather Academy. So I'm sure that some of you will be familiar with the Weather Academy. If you just Google Rail Weather Academy, all one word, you'll get the website. You don't have to be a Network Rail person. It's for anybody in the industry. And I've just done a screenshot there of what the Weather Hub does. And you can see there's tools and resources and some learning on there. And I've just done a screenshot to show you what they've got. So they do these virtual lunch and learns, which are well worth attending. They also record them, so you can come back and look at them later, so you can see some of the webinars that they've run. Climate change, risk and adaptation planning. We've got one about adhesion. It's a lovely picture with a leaf on a rail, which hasn't quite got squashed yet. We've got, there's one about the Network Rail Weather Service, and then one about what factors influence hot rail temperatures. So those are just some examples of what's available. They've done a few podcasts as well. I think there's 3 on there. Again, worth a listen if you're on a train somewhere and fancy something slightly different. And there's links to various e-learning modules as well about the weather. There's workshops as well. So I attended the one in York last year. I don't know when the next ones are running, but and again, it's not just for Network Rail, it's for people in other parts of the industry as well. And it was, the one I did was 2 days. We had a guy called Brendan who had come from MetDesk, who run the Network Rail Weather Service, and he was really, really good. I felt my understanding of weather and weather systems went up a level after his session. They do some sessions on kind of behavioral stuff, and they run a few of these desktop exercises as well. But they definitely worth, if you get a chance to attend one of those workshops, it's worth doing. So that is what that's what I've kind of got about the Carmon stuff that I thought I would share here. And then there's 3 small little ones that I'll tell you a little bit about extreme heat. So the first one we're going to look at is the one for OLE. So we haven't closed this one yet, but the activity has actually happened. So it was basically, we need to do better in our summer prep for OLE. The photo there, you can see that a dropper has come. I actually don't know. I don't know. I'm getting used to OLE. I don't know all the words for the different bits of it yet. So maybe in a few months I'll be better at that. But basically, so I know that one is dated March 2025. They actually did one of these about 1.5 years ago or something. So they did get this technical advice note out to the teams, and it's essentially basically getting summer preparedness better, requiring specific enhanced maintenance activities to be undertaken in the lead up to summer, making sure that the assets perform better. There was also, they introduced the idea of having these weather-related critical defects with a new code in Ellipse, so that they could be counted later, because that was one of the problems, was that it was very hard to analyze the data of failures because they weren't tagged to weather. So they've now created this weather related critical defects, so they can actually analyze the failures they've got. And then the little graph there is just a moment in time of the activities that, as OLE maintenance teams, they need to do or need to report on. And it just provides you with, red is obviously they've missed the date, or red is they've got no planned date. So this allows the team in the regional engineering team and managers to be able to see that there's a problem. We need to get that sorted before the summer comes, which is really good. They didn't have that kind of visibility previously. So that's with OLE, which is quite good. This one for track, which you guys will probably be mostly interested in. So this particular issue that was identified in the Doug Okervie report identified that there had been some track buckles where deficiencies hadn't been identified and they weren't in the critical rail temperature register and hadn't been mitigated. So you can see there was a track instruction, a regional track instruction issued back in February last year. Oh yeah, and the top of it there says that there were 8 buckles in 2022 and only 1 had been on the CRT register. And the rest of that track instruction gives very clear guidance as to what the teams need to do in order to make sure that the CRT register is fully populated and the locations are being managed. The screenshot, which you won't be able to read, it's a bit fuzzy, is it a daily email that comes? Yes. Yeah, a daily email that comes through, which has a RAG report for each of the locations on the CRT register so that the teams and control knows what's up. So we have closed this particular rec and quite happy that it's being managed properly. Okay, and this is the last one that I wanted to tell you about. So essentially, the Simon Lane report said that Network Rail's route and regional weather plans were found to be bland, was one of the phrases that was used. So they were just inadequate the way we did it. And so each of these items were picked up as things that we needed to do better at. So each of the routes now, so we've done closure documents for each of these. We've gone through each item. So having a risk register for each asset class, including the planned mitigations. Recommendation to have an operating train plan, which can be picked off the shelf. Now, I think only East Midlands trains have got that. I think the others don't, but there's different ways that people manage different, the train operating companies and control manage that in their own ways. How to manage stranded trains, how you would do a route proving if you had to close a line, what your public and staff comms plan is, looking at a staff deployment plan if you need to enhance your customer service support during any of those hot weather days, having enhanced command and control arrangements, including deployment of maintenance teams and equipment, train service plans by the TOC, including the provision of freight paths and what those likely speeds might be, and then any additional risk mitigation activities that might be needed. And so the next slide is just it's a flavour of how we've closed these out. So the table is each of those items. This is one of the routes closure plans. You've got each of those items from the list before, and then we've got like a little summary of what the route has done, why what they've done is working, and then links. And we've done so links to each of the documents that's referred to. So that includes things like key route strategies. There's summer preparedness reviews that happen. They've got extreme heat operations plans, among other things. So each of these pages, you can just see there's a screenshot to the relevant documents to kind of say, yeah, we think we're in a much better place than we were a couple of years ago. And my last slide, so I didn't go over. So the last slide here is a summary. It's kind of the Weather Risk Task Force vision slide, and we'll just spend a moment going through this. So their vision is to run a safe, our vision as an organisation, our vision through the Weather Risk Task Force is to run a safe, affordable and more reliable service for passengers during adverse and extreme weather. So if you start up here, so we kind of coordinating whole system change. So a system of systems, it's always system, isn't it? It's system engineering. We need to have the Department of Transport. We obviously know Great British Railways is coming, and making sure we've got appropriate, clear policies. Building competency. So I talked about that, about the Weather Academy, building this community. tools and data, and that is having a comprehensive asset data set, and that I think is really, really tricky, because so many of our assets, the asset types, we've all got different systems. I know we've got Ellipse for a lot of them, but everyone's is slightly different. And Ellipse isn't perfect either. And so it's quite difficult to be able to, for me anyway. I can see in the future, I can definitely see how in the future we can have weather forecasting matching with assets where we know the thresholds will be breached, and you get an alarm and you take an action and it's all very smooth. But I think we're a little while away from that. But it's a good place to want to get to. Improved forecasting, so that talks about the Rail Operations Weather Service, and it's got the convective alerting tool in there. Just trying to see what else is down here. So we've got, the risk-based operational decision making. So one of the things I haven't spoken about with some of the action plans was around improving operational decision making. Integrated asset management. So there's a lot of activity gone on and going on between the drainage teams and the geotech teams about trying to get them their kind of decision making more tied in together, so that they're not making decisions kind of without each other. Not for want of trying, because everybody wants to do the right thing, but sometimes our systems mean that people, can make a decision over here without this person who might need to know about it knowing. Planning and preparing for adverse weather. So that's the kind of the vision poster that they've got to summarize all the activity they're doing, with the idea being that we'll reduce flooding, having better passenger information, etc. There, you get it. Nice drawing. That is it from me.
Yeah, James. Is there any data to show that embankment slips are increasing with the slightly more extreme environment?
Yes, I think so. So when the last time I looked at the numbers, it looked like we were coming down in terms of earthwork failures. I'm looking back at the geotech team to see if that's changed.
I think there's been less in the last 12 months than there was in the preceding.
Yeah, so the numbers, so I looked at each of the control periods, and it had we weren't recording them very well early days. 20 years ago, we didn't have a system for recording them. So I think they kind of increased because we were increasing our awareness of recording them. The number of derailments due to landslides was reducing. And then Carmont happened in the last control period. I think the number of the highest risk ones, the highest scoring ones, I think are reducing. But I mean, there's so few of them. Like, you're talking, how many in Eastern last year? About 50, something like that. So it's not huge numbers, and so one big incident can skew it quite a bit.
So
yeah,
picking out the trends without looking at the weather behind it, it's almost. And I think, like you said about the reporting of it, you've really only gotten to the stage you have now in the last
10 years. Yeah, I think so.
I mean, you've only got 10 years of data, which if the weather was the same every year, 10 years of data is low data.
Yeah.
But the weather's different every year, so therefore 10 years.
Yeah.
So like this one, it's been
so far. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Relative.
But there is evidence that our assets are degrading with, just like soil and rock will degrade over time. That is just what happens. It gets weathered, and it'll get weaker. And they've been there for 150, 180 years, some of them.
Question that's two-parter. So firstly, as a result of all the work that's been going on to the recommendations, do you think that Rail and the railway is in a better state to withstand hot summers. So this summer's meant to be quite hot.
Yeah.
Do you think will we cope better if we have a hot summer?
So,
yeah.
So from what I've seen, yes, without a doubt, there's been a real step up in the prep that goes on and the kind of expectation. There's processes in place now. There's tools that allow people to see where the problems are, and there's an expectation and a reporting that goes up through the route directors to the regional managing director, and they have a seasonal preparedness meeting in advance of summer, winter, and autumn. We don't do a spring one, do we? But that is quite. I've been to a couple of those now, and it can be quite challenging. And there is the expectation that there's a lot of information covering off a lot of the stuff that I looked at there. So yeah, I think it's looking better.
And so the second part of the question is, so as after Carmel, there was obviously a big period of time when they were writing a report, but in that meantime, the company was making changes. So if we're in a better position now, how much of that is due to the internal changes, or how much is due to actioning on the recommendations, or are they a bit of an overlap?
I'd say there's a bit of an overlap. So I think the CAT tool, I think, was game changing for managing risk during those convective, those high intensity summer rainfall events. They've changed some of the standards, but that kind of happened a little later. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that was the really big one, that the convective rainfall stuff for earthworks. I think the rest of the recs, even though we are doing stuff and we can say, yes, we've done this and we're mapping it to the rec, a lot of that work had started. So you remember the Institute of Asset Management slide that I showed you with all the stuff that Mona was doing mapped against it. A lot of that was already kind of in progress or started. So yeah.
Just adding continuation to the Louis question, I think, is there across the railways, due to hot weathers, individual asset owners are getting impacted, like in the last minute, like for example, air condition failures in the line side REBs, and similarly track, because of the heat changes. So that individual disciplines, is there any standards which is, I haven't seen from the last 3-4 years, or due to these extreme weathers, I didn't see any standards changes because of it extreme hot. Any emergency standards coming up on board? I haven't seen.
So there has been. I might mangle this now, Louise.
I got some of the track ones. So so the track standard mod 14, which is track 001, has been updated. So there's been a few updates there. There's also, as of last year, it was brought in. It's a risk assessment to run trains over a buckle at sort of very low speed. So one of the issues I think that's identified in 2022 is the fact that you have a buckle, you stop trains, you might have a stranded train. How long can people be comfortable on that train if there's not much water, not with the aircons functioning? Like it could be really uncomfortable for them. So you balance the risk to those people versus running a train over what may be a very small buckle at a very low speed. Is that the right thing to do? And actually on balance, that might be just to rescue that train, get those passengers off at the next station, and they can continue their journey or just not boil on a train, basically. So that came in, that was last year, came in. And I think that's been updated a little bit this year. I'm not sure how many times it was needed last year. We didn't really have a hot summer, so maybe this summer we'll test it a little bit more. So that's coming to track. And again, a few more changes in terms of speed restrictions as well.
Yeah, and there's the one about not having to have a person watching. You don't have to have a watching person.
So again, it seems like obvious now, but for the extreme hot weather, I think there were a few remote temperature monitors available, but you just had a watch person who could look at that bit of track and see if it's buckling, but now, or measure the temperature. But after that extreme hot summer, now bought a load of remote monitors. You can go along, stick them on your rail, and then from a dashboard in the office, you can see, right, the key junctions, what temperature they had seen. So things like that, it seems like why wasn't that in place years ago? Well, it's only due to the hot summer that's really sort of pushed it forward. But things like that have helped massively. So again, you can you've got a picture of where your hot temperatures are on the network, and you can make better decisions. So the few track things.
And you're not expecting people to be standing out in the heat, which doesn't make any sense really either. So
It's not safe. I think also, I think we also have a bit more of planning. So say you've got a section of railway, and actually the OLE is the limiting factor for hot weather. Would you then focus on removing your risk sites for track in that section, knowing that actually, say, I think OLE cuts, I'm not sure what temperature, I'll say 39 degrees, OLE is good for 39 degrees, and you have to impose a speed restriction on the track, say 45 degrees. Well, would you bother targeting that area, knowing full well that once the OLE hits 39, there'll be changes there? So there's a little bit more joined up thinking between disciplines.
Yeah.
Yes.
We think we'll be better in a better place in 10 years' time, much better. You know, I mean, I think what you've got is a tremendous challenge here, and you've given us an awful lot of information, but it is the only part of the railway where you can't control it with the change of weather climate, which is making a massive impact on everything. Do we have preventative measures in place at specific sites that are taking place to protect us for the next 10 years?
So there will be some individual locations where people might be doing that, but there is an exercise going. I don't think we've started yet. The climate change adaptation pathways. I didn't mention it here today, but in essence, and again, this is my understanding of it, is we're going to look at the network, look at what assets we've got and what kind of problems they might suffer during, if they, during climate change, or, are they more likely to be flooded? Are they more likely to, get very hot, etc. And they're using a data approach to this, and then identify areas that actually this one is the highest risk area. We need to physically change something about the assets here to allow us to withstand it. So that activity is going on. I can't remember the details of the timescales for that. And in terms of your first question about, do I think it'll be better in 10 years? I mean, I do, definitely. We were talking earlier about AI. I mean, there's huge scope for AI to be able to help us with some of this data analysis. Some of the stuff that's happening with AI VR is fab, really. So yeah, I'm optimistic, but that's just probably because I'm an optimistic kind of person. Oh, there's nothing online. I attempted to make it simple. Because as you can see, there's so much happening that it, sometimes I feel a bit overwhelmed, like, well, what am I going to actually tell them about? So I tried to pick out bits that I thought were most interesting.
Last question. Similar to ellipse data, I know it talks about what are all the failures across the whole route. So similar to ellipse data, is there any database, like just to understand, because of these assets in the summer or in the winter or anywhere, because of these assets has been failed because of this extreme hot weather? Is there any database where everyone can look?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about where anyone can look, but as was mentioned with the OLE one, they now have a way of checking their failures. I don't know if other assets have started doing that. With geotech, you can. There's a way of seeing, was it extreme rain beforehand or whatever, but I don't know about other assets.
It's all like a lessons learned for all the individual design teams and etc. to understand.
Yeah, so I think we have wrong side failure forms. So that's for all failures. It's not necessarily related to weather, but you would mention on that form, like for example, you would mention obviously information about the weather that led up to that. Wrong side failure. I'm not sure if that information is shared externally. I suspect it's not. I know some of it will be reported via the ORR, I'm sure, which may be available, but that's, I'm not sure how much is available outside.
There's obviously the data, which I haven't shown here today. There's the data about the performance impact, so the number of minutes delay due to weather and the cost of that. I've never looked to see other assets and the actual the actual failures mapped against it. Good question.
If it's anything to be sort of like shared and further learning, I think what Jen says happen is internally it'll be reviewed and it might be like a standards update, like based on these events, we've learned that a certain asset is not appropriate for use in track, therefore the standard will be updated to reflect that asset should no longer be used, possibly because it's not fit for the high temperatures or something like that. So yeah, you'd like to think that it would be sort of kept internally. There's useful information everyone has that they don't want designers producing designs that aren't fit for high temperatures of experience. But it obviously does take a bit of time to filter through the standards update process, but project team should be informing their designers if there's any particular requirements they need to consider for extreme weather. Okay. If that's the last questions, just thank Claire and then away. People online. Thank you. And yeah, so if anyone's available, wants to go to the pub for a celebratory drink,
Yeah, I
we're
will.
heading to the tap momentarily. See you next time.
Thanks everyone. Bye.